On a quiet September day in 2002, a 23-year-old mother kissed her own mother goodbye and drove off to pick up her 4-year-old son. She never came back. For nearly 2 decades, her family waited, staring at the phone, praying for answers, clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, she and her little boy were still out there somewhere. But the truth that finally surfaced wasn't a miracle. It was a nightmare, a confession, a furnace, and a secret buried in silence for 18 long years. This is a chilling story of Angela Cox and her son Mikey, a case that proves sometimes, even when the truth comes to light, justice never does. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed, because the stories I share each week are not just about crime, but about voices that deserve to be heard. In September 2002, in the small town of Salem, Arkansas, life seemed quiet, predictable, and safe. It was a kind of place where neighbors waved to one another at the grocery store, where gossip traveled faster than the mail, and where people left their doors unlocked without a second thought. But beneath that surface calm, one family was about to face a tragedy that would haunt their lives for nearly 2 decades. Her name was Angela Mack Cox, but to friends and family, she was simply Angie. At 23 years old, she was still young, still finding her footing in the world, but she carried herself with determination. Life had not been easy. She had her struggles. Like anyone try to raise a child at a young age, but there was one thing Angela never wavered on: her love for her little boy, Thomas Michael Retu, affectionately called Mikey. Mikey was only 4 years old. He was bright, energetic, and full of that kind of boundless curiosity that could exhaust adults but fill a home with joy. With his gapped teeth and infectious grin, he was a heartbeat of Angela's world. For a while, Mikey had been staying with a couple named Clarence and Barbara Crusson, who lived on a farm across the border in Alton, Missouri. It was supposed to be temporary, a way for Angela to get back on her feet, work on her future, and then bring her son home when the time was right. But by late 2002, Angela had decided that time had come. She was ready to reclaim her role as his full-time mother, ready to move forward together as a family. On the evening of September 9th, Angela sat in her mother's kitchen. Her mom, Lorna Poole, listened as Angela explained her plan. The kitchen was warm and familiar, the hum of appliances filling the quiet pauses in their conversation. Angela's voice was steady, but beneath her words was a clear urgency. She wanted Mikey back. Lorna offered to come along on the drive. It was, after all, a decent trip to Missouri, and a second pair of eyes and ears would be reassuring. But Angela brushed it off gently. She was 23, she insisted, old enough to handle her own affairs. It wasn't just about retrieving Mikey. It was about showing she could manage her life again. Their conversation ended like so many between mothers and daughters. Simple, tender, but unforgettable. Angela said, "I love you. See you soon." Neither realized it would be the last time those words passed between them. The next morning, Angela got into her car and headed toward the Crusson farm. The road stretched through rolling fields, patches of forest, and sleepy towns. She may have been nervous, but she was determined. This was supposed to be a new beginning, for her and for Mikey. But as the hours passed, no call came. Evening set in, and the phone at Lorna's house stayed silent. She tried calling Angela, but there was no answer. At first, she told herself it was nothing. Maybe Angela was busy. Maybe the reunion had been emotional. Maybe they just needed time together. But as days turned into weeks, that uneasy silence grew heavier. The first calls rang endlessly before the line clicked over to voicemail. Later, the phone was disconnected entirely. Angela was gone. Desperate for answers, Lorna called the Crussons. Barbara's voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm. She insisted Angela and Mikey had never arrived. Maybe Angela changed her mind. Maybe she went somewhere else. Maybe she needed space. The words were polite but hollow. Lorna knew her daughter. Angela wasn't the type to just vanish. Not without telling someone, and certainly not without her son. By December, 3 months after that last phone call, worry had hardened into dread. Something was wrong. Deep down, Lorna knew it. She marched into the small Salem police station, hands trembling, and filed a missing persons report. The officer behind the desk, used to the small-town routine of traffic tickets and the occasional bar fight, seemed skeptical. His eyes suggested doubt. Young mothers, he explained, sometimes just run off. It happens more than people think. But Angela's family refused to believe that. They knew her love for Mikey was too strong, too consuming, for her to walk away voluntarily. Lorna left the station feeling hollow, but not defeated. She went to the local print shop and made flyers. Soon Angela's face, bright, hopeful, unaware of the storm coming, stared back at her from photocopied sheets. Next to her, Mikey's school portrait with his wide grin smiled out to the world. Above them, in bold black letters, the word missing screamed for attention. The community took notice. Salem wasn't a place where people disappeared without someone noticing. Everyone knew Angela. She'd gone to the local high school, worked shifts at the main street diner, laughed with friends at the gas station counter. And Mikey, he was just a little boy. The thought of him out there, lost or worse, stirred something in the townspeople. Flyers went up, tips trickled in, but none led to Angela. None led to Mikey. And as fall turned to winter, the bitter truth set in. They were gone. Somewhere on that drive to Missouri, Angela and her son had vanished into the shadows, and the answers were nowhere to be found. By the winter of 2002, the silence around Angela and Mikey's disappearance had grown deafening. 3 months had passed since that final phone call, and what began as a mother's worry had hardened into something much darker, dread. For Angela's mother, Lorna, every day became an exercise in both hope and despair. Each time the phone rang, her heart leapt, only to shatter when it wasn't her daughter's voice on the other end. Each knock on the door felt like it might finally bring answers, but it never did. When she first filed the missing person report, Lorna expected the authorities to jump into action. After all, this was her daughter, just 23 years old, and her grandson, a boy barely 4. But the Salem Police Department was small. A couple of officers, a secretary, and one holding cell were all that stood between this quiet community and the chaos of the outside world. When Lorna sat across from Officer Matthews and explained her fears, she could see it in his eyes. Doubt. To him, Angela fit the pattern of too many other cases he'd seen. Young women who ran off, chasing freedom or fleeing responsibility. He scribbled notes, asked the standard questions, and promised to follow up. But deep down, Lorna knew his heart wasn't in it. Angela hadn't run away. She hadn't started over somewhere else. She hadn't abandoned her son. Lorna left the station feeling empty, but not powerless. If the police wouldn't take action, she would. She began with flyers. She went to the print shop, her hands trembling as she fed paper into the machine. Soon, stacks of black and white posters sat on the counter, Angela's smiling face staring back at her from page. Beside her was Mikey's school portrait, his tiny frame dress in a collared shirt, his wide grin revealing missing baby teeth. Across the top, in bold, capital letters, the word missing. Lorna and her family plastered those flyers everywhere. On telephone poles, store windows, the bulletin board at the diner where Angela used to work. They drove to surrounding towns, tacking them to church doors, gas station pumps, and community boards. Everywhere they went, strangers' eyes lingered on the faces of Angela and Mikey, and slowly, the town of Salem responded. This was the kind of place where everyone knew everybody, where gossip spread faster than newsprint. Angela wasn't some stranger. She had grown up here. She was a former classmate, a co-worker, the smiling waitress who once poured coffee refills at the main street diner. People remembered Mikey, too, the little boy who toddled down the aisles of the local grocery store with his mom. The community rallied. Neighbors showed up to help with search efforts. Volunteers combed through wooded areas, and tips trickled in. Each phone call brought a flicker of hope, a sighting here, a rumor there. But each lead evaporated under scrutiny, leaving nothing behind but more frustration. The longer Angela and Mikey were gone, the more theories began to spread. Some whispered that Angela had simply run off, unable to handle the pressures of young motherhood. Others speculated that someone close to her might have been involved. A few even suggested that Angela and Mikey had been caught in something much darker, something no one wanted to believe could happen in their quiet community. But Lorna knew the truth in her bones. Her daughter wouldn't leave without a word. And Mikey? Angela loved him too fiercely. The idea that she would abandon her only child was unthinkable. And yet, the silence continued. Months turned into years. Each new season felt like a cruel reminder of time slipping away. Angela's birthday came and went with no phone call. Mikey's birthdays passed with empty chairs at the table. Holidays that should have been filled with laughter were instead marked by absence. The years of silence left scars. For Lorna, it was like living with a wound that never healed, a pain that never dulled. Every time she saw another child Mikey's age, her heart clenched. She wondered what he would look like now. If he was still alive, would he have the same grin? Would he still have his mother's smile? As time dragged on, even the community's whispers quieted. The flyers grew weathered and torn, some fading until only ghostly outlines of Angela and Mikey's faces remained. Eventually, the case slipped into the shadows of memory, becoming another unsolved mystery in a long line of small-town tragedies. But Lorna never gave up. Even when the world moved on, she kept searching. She kept calling law enforcement, kept asking questions, kept holding on to the belief that somewhere, somehow, the truth would come out. 18 years is a long time to live in silence. But silence has a way of cracking, of breaking open under the weight of secrets. And in 2020, after nearly 2 decades of waiting, the case that everyone thought was lost would finally resurface. A cold case detective would knock on Barbara Crussen's door, and what she revealed would shake this quiet community to its core. By the time the year 2020 arrived, nearly 2 decades had passed since Angela Cox and her little boy Mikey vanished. Their names had faded from headlines, their faces from flyers. But for Angela's mother, Lorna, the absence never went away. Every day still carried the weight of 2 missing voices. It seemed that the case had grown cold forever. But sometimes, even the coldest cases find new life. Detective Dale Weaver had a reputation for persistence. He wasn't the type to accept loose ends or unresolved mysteries. And when he looked at Angela's file, something about it gnawed at him. A young mother and her 4-year-old son didn't just vanish without a trace. Somewhere, hidden in the shadows of old witness statements and forgotten evidence, the truth had to be waiting. Weaver reopened the case file and began pulling at the threads one by one. The first thing he noticed was how little had been done in the early investigation. With limited manpower and resources, the original officers had followed only a handful of leads before letting the case slide into silence. Rumors had swirled about Angela running off, but no one had seriously considered the more sinister possibilities. Weaver decided to start fresh. He went back through every statement, every name mentioned, every lead left unexplored. Again and again, one name surfaced: Clarence and Barbara Crussen. The Crussens were the couple who had been caring for Mikey before Angela disappeared. They lived on a quiet farm across the Missouri border, just outside the small town of Alton. From the start, they had insisted that Angela and Mikey never arrived that September day. But Weaver couldn't shake the feeling that something about their story didn't add up. Digging deeper, he learned that Clarence Crussen was no longer alive. He had been killed in 2012, shot in Laredo, Texas, under circumstances that raised more questions than answers. His death meant he could never be questioned, but his widow, Barbara, was still alive. And so, 18 years after Angela and Mikey disappeared, Detective Weaver knocked on Barbara Crussen's door. At first, Barbara repeated the same story she had told back in 2002. She and Clarence had never seen Angela or Mikey that day. They didn't know what had happened. They had no answers. Her words were calm, but her eyes told a different story. Weaver pressed harder. He requested that Barbara take a polygraph test, a lie detector. Though not perfect, it was a tool investigators often use to break through walls of denial. Barbara agreed. The test did not go well. When the results came back, they suggested deception. Barbara's calm facade began to crack. The weight of 18 years of silence pressed down, and then the confession came. Barbara admitted that Clarence had not been truthful. In fact, she said, he had done away with both Angela Mack Cox and little Mikey. Her words landed like a hammer blow. For 18 years, Angela's family had waited for answers. And now, the truth was spilling out, not from a suspect under arrest, but from the widow of a dead man. Barbara described what Clarence had told her. Angela had left Mikey in their care. Clarence had arranged for legal adoption papers to be drawn up, but when Angela changed her mind and demanded her son back, Clarence snapped. He killed Angela, and he killed Mikey. And then Barbara revealed the most chilling detail of all. Clarence had disposed of their bodies in a furnace on the farm. According to her, when the couple eventually moved away from that property, Clarence insisted they take the furnace with them, not because it was valuable, but because of what it had been used for, because of the dark secret it contained. Weaver listened, stunned. After 18 years, the mystery of Angela and Mikey's disappearance seemed to have an answer, one more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. But there was a problem. Clarence, the man Barbara accused, was already dead, shot years earlier in Texas. He could never stand trial, never face justice in a courtroom. That left only Barbara, the woman now confessing. But she insisted she had no part in the crime itself. She claimed she had only learned of it afterward, from Clarence himself, and with no physical remains, no forensic evidence, and only her word to go on, prosecutors faced a wall of complications. Still, her statement was enough for authorities to officially close the case. On April 7th, 2021, the Fulton County Sheriff's Office announced that Angela and Mikey's case was resolved. Resolved but not solved. Not in the way most families hope for. Because while the confession offered an explanation, it left behind something haunting. Angela and Mikey's bodies were never found. No trace of them was ever recovered. Only Barbara's words tied their disappearance to Clarence and the furnace. For Lorna, Angela's mother, the confession brought both relief and torment. At last, she knew what had happened. But knowing wasn't the same as closure. Her daughter and grandson were still gone, their final resting place lost to time and ashes. 18 years of silence had ended in a confession, but the truth, it seemed, had come too late for justice. Confessions are strange things. They can be freeing for the guilty, devastating for the innocent, and haunting for everyone left behind. For nearly 2 decades, the disappearance of Angela Cox and her little boy Mikey had been nothing more than a question mark in the minds of Salem, Arkansas. But in 2020, Barbara Crussen's voice finally broke the silence. When Detective Dale Weaver sat across from her in that small interview room, he expected resistance. After all, she had been denying Angela's arrival for 18 years. But the polygraph results had cracked her armor. Her hands trembled, her eyes darted, and finally, she began to speak. At first, her story sounded almost ordinary. She explained how Angela had left Mikey with her and Clarence back in 2002. Clarence had convinced Angela to let them care for the boy temporarily. According to Barbara, her husband was determined to adopt Mikey legally, and papers were being drawn up. But then, Barbara's voice wavered. She described the turning point, the moment when Angela changed her mind. The young mother wanted her child back. She had a right to him. She was ready to take him home. That decision, Barbara claimed, sealed Angela's fate. According to her, Clarence refused to let Mikey go. He was obsessed with keeping the boy, and when Angela pushed back, his obsession turned violent. Barbara's confession painted a horrifying picture. Clarence killed Angela, and then, to erase any chance of losing Mikey, he killed the 4-year-old too. The words chilled Detective Weaver. But what came next was even darker. Barbara said Clarence burned their bodies in the farm's furnace, the same furnace that sat quietly in the outbuilding, churning smoke into the cold September sky back in 2002. It was there, Barbara claimed, that Angela and her little boy were reduced to ashes. And in a grotesque twist, Clarence refused to leave the furnace behind when the couple later moved. To anyone else, it was just a piece of heavy equipment. But for Clarence, it was something far more sinister. The keeper of his secrets. He had transported it with him, ensuring no one else would ever look inside. The more Barbara talked, the more surreal it became. She admitted she hadn't gone to the police, hadn't spoken up, hadn't done anything to help Angela's grieving mother. For nearly 20 years, she had lived side by side with that secret, her silence compounding the tragedy. When pressed on why she never told anyone sooner, Barbara claimed she'd been afraid of Clarence while he was alive, afraid of what he might do to her if she spoke. And when he died in 2012, she said she convinced herself the truth no longer mattered. But the truth always matters. Weaver listened, recording every word. He knew that while Barbara's confession finally gave Angela's family answers, it was also frustratingly incomplete. There were no bodies, no physical evidence, nothing but the word of a widow who had chosen silence for almost 2 decades. Her statement was enough for the Fulton County Sheriff's Office to close the case in 2021. Angela and Mikey were declared dead, murdered by Clarence Crusson. Barbara was not charged. For Angela's mother, Lorna, the news was devastating. She had waited by the phone for years, hoping against hope that her daughter and grandson would come home. She had clung to the idea that maybe Angela was out there somewhere, raising Mikey in secret, waiting for the right moment to return. That fragile hope was gone now. The confession confirmed her worst nightmare. Her daughter hadn't run away. She hadn't disappeared by choice. She had been murdered, along with her little boy, in the most horrifying way imaginable. But even in that confirmation, there was no peace. Because Barbara's words left behind doubts that will never be erased. Was she telling the whole truth? Did she play a bigger role than she admitted? And if Clarence was truly the killer, why had she protected him for so long? The community of Salem, too, struggled with the news. For nearly 2 decades, neighbors had whispered theories, speculated in hushed tones, and wondered what happened. The revelation was like a wound reopening, exposing something rotten just beneath the surface of small-town life. Angela and Mikey had been part of that town. Their smiles, their laughter, their presence had been missed for 18 long years. And now, the truth of their fate left the town grieving all over again. Detective Weaver's persistence had brought the truth into the light. But for many, it didn't feel like justice. Clarence Crusson was dead. Barbara Crusson walked free. And the furnace, the object that may have held the last remains of Angela and Mikey, was gone, never recovered, never searched. The case, officially, was closed. But in the hearts of those who loved Angela and Mikey, it remains painfully unfinished. Because some confessions don't heal. Some only deepen a wound. When the Fulton County Sheriff's Office announced in April 2021 that the case of Angela Cox and her son Mikey was officially closed, it should have felt like the end of a nightmare. But for many, it felt like an unfinished story. Angela's mother, Lorna, had waited for nearly 20 years for answers. 2 decades of searching, of hoping, of keeping Angela's and Mikey's faces alive through flyers, through conversations, through prayers. The confession from Barbara Crusson gave her something she hadn't had before. Knowledge. But knowledge is not the same as closure. She now knew that her daughter and grandson were gone, that they had been taken from her in a cruel and senseless act. But the absence of their bodies, the fact that their final resting place was reduced to a story about a furnace, left her with an emptiness words could never fill. In interviews after the case was closed, Lorna expressed what so many families of the missing feel. A mixture of relief and torment. Relief that she finally knew. Torment that the truth had come too late for justice. Torment that the man responsible, Clarence Crusson, had died nearly a decade earlier, escaping the courtroom and the prison cell that should have awaited him. And Barbara, the widow whose confession opened the door to the truth, walked free. She faced no charges. Authorities believed her story that she had played no role in the murders. But to many, her silence was complicity. She had chosen silence for 18 years. Silence that allowed Angela's mother to suffer. Silence that kept an entire community in the dark. It was a silence that will forever hang over her name. For Salem, Arkansas, and Alton, Missouri, the case left a permanent scar. These were small towns, the kind of places where everyone knows everyone else, where neighbors wave as they pass and gossip spreads faster than fire. For years, the mystery of Angela and Mikey's disappearance had haunted them. People speculated in whispers, passing theories like secrets. Some believed Angela had run away. Some thought she had been killed. Others wondered if Mikey was still alive somewhere, growing up under another name. The confession shattered those possibilities. It forced the town to confront a darkness that had lived among them, a trusted couple known in the community who had carried out an unspeakable act. For Detective Dale Weaver, reopening the case had been about persistence, about giving a voice to the voiceless. His work pulled the truth from the shadows, but also highlighted a painful reality of law enforcement. Sometimes the truth doesn't bring satisfaction. Sometimes it only brings a cruel reminder of what can never be undone. The furnace, the centerpiece of Barbara's confession, was never recovered, never searched. No remains were ever found. In that absence, questions remain. Did Clarence truly burn Angela and Mikey's bodies? Or is there another secret buried somewhere on that farm, waiting to be unearthed? We may never know. Angela Mack Cox was just 23 years old when she vanished. She had her whole life ahead of her, and her only son in her arms. Mikey was just 4, a child who should have been running through playgrounds, learning his letters, and bringing home messy finger paintings for his mother to hang on the wall. Their lives were cut short, their futures stolen. Today, their names live on in news articles, in true crime discussions, in the memories of those who love them, and in a haunting way. Their stories become part of a larger truth, a reminder that evil can hide in plain sight, that sometimes the people we trust most can carry the darkest secrets. For Angela's family, the pain is ongoing. For the community, the wound is still fresh. And for the rest of us, the story is a chilling echo. Justice delayed, justice denied. Angela and Mikey never got the chance to grow older, to laugh again, to live the lives they deserved. What remains is their memory, carried by the people who refuse to let them be forgotten. Because in the end, that's all we can do. Remember their names. Speak their story. Keep their light alive in a world that can so easily turn dark. Angela Mack Cox. Thomas Mikey Cox. A mother and son. Gone but not forgotten. And that is where the story leaves us. A young mother, Angela Cox, and her little boy, Mikey, stolen from this world far too soon. A confession that came too late. And justice that never truly arrived. But their names live on because people like you choose to remember. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe Barbara told the full truth? Or do you think there's more to the story? Secrets that will never surface? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If you found this story as haunting as I did, take a second to hit that like button. It really helps this channel reach more people who need to hear stories like Angela's and Mikey's. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. Because every week we dive into mysteries, tragedies, and true crime stories that deserve to be remembered. The darkness may have silenced Angela and Mikey's voices, but together, we can make sure their story is never forgotten. Until next time, stay safe, take care of each other, and remember, the truth always finds its way to the surface.